first, thanks Barb and Celia for organizing the sessions. It's really an honor to be invited to present here. All right, so in this paper, I use archaeological animal bone data to lay a foundation for a transnational approach to food, health, and the environment in Chinese diaspora research. It's like technology, yes. I begin with a brief discussion of relevant anti-Chinese rhetoric before turning to data collected from archaeologically recovered animal bones from two 19th century Chinese sites in the American West that reveal discontinuities between the daily lives of Chinese immigrants and the stereotypes levied against them. I interpret these data with an eye towards the generative nature of migration, the multi-scalar connections of migrant lives, and strategies used by Chinese people to live their lives in a time of growing anti-Chinese sentiment. Nearly 400,000 people left southern China to the United States in the last half of the 19th century. As Madeline Shu notes, regular correspondence, remittance payments, return trips, and the trade of goods helped maintain connections between home villages and Chinese communities abroad, creating transnational lives that span the Pacific Ocean. Chinese in the mid to late 19th century United States faced growing anti-Chinese racism and violence. Although much of this was driven by labor conflicts, Chinese food practices, the health of Chinese people, and the environmental impact of Chinese food-based industries also played critical roles in anti-Chinese prejudice. I want to briefly touch on several themes in this discourse to create a starting point for my discussion of archaeological data. Food was central to anti-Chinese rhetoric. Anglo writers variously exoticized and ridiculed Chinese food practices, othering Chinese people and often marking them as less than Anglo people. For instance, in a 1908 propaganda piece titled Meat versus Rice, American Manhood Against Asiatic Hooliganism, Samuel Gompers and Hermann Gustav argue that culinary differences mirror the moral gulf between Americans and Chinese, who as rice eaters are prone to, quote, animal passions and live the, quote, life of vermin. Stereotypes of Chinese people as cat and rat eaters dehumanize them and cast them as filthy and disease-bearing. Disease outbreaks in Chinatowns are used as evidence of the supposed unsanitary habits of Chinese people, despite being the result of cramped living conditions caused by violence and anti-Chinese land ownership laws. Chinese people are also linked to infections of American food resources. Smear campaigns in the 1880s to drive the Chinese out of the San Francisco Bay Area pork production industry hinged on accusations that Chinese pork producers sold tainted and diseased meat. Fear that Chinese cooks would slip rodent meat into dumplings and sausages, and thereby affect white diners played on similar tropes. Finally, Chinese people were cast as dangerous to the natural environment itself. Extensive public debate by Anglo fishermen and biologists emphasized the potential for Chinese fishermen on the West Coast to eradicate California's teeming fisheries. Chinese bag nets, which collected small and large fish alike, were demonized for supposedly destroying the fry of large, commercially important fish. David Starr Jordan, an esteemed ichthyologist and president of Stanford University, was especially vocal in his belief that the Pacific Coast fisheries are being, quote, constantly and rapidly diminished by Chinese fine mesh nets. The fact that many of these stereotypes linger today in one form or another serves as a testament to both their historical impact and the need to continue to challenge them. Archaeology can provide a window into past daily life, offering a counter-narrative about how Chinese immigrants live their lives amidst rising anti-Chinese sentiment. Today, I present archaeological data from two 19th century Chinese sites in the United States. The first, the Market Street Chinatown, was an urban Chinese community in San Jose, California. The Market Street Chinatown's over 1,000 permanent residents enjoyed access to numerous businesses and restaurants, a temple, a theater, and a wide range of imported goods available via San Francisco. The second site, the Aspen Section Camp, was a Chinese railroad and maintenance campsite in southwestern Wyoming. Home to under 20 Chinese railroad workers, the Aspen Section Camp was dependent on locally available goods, supplemented by choice imports delivered by rail. To examine the themes of food, health, and environmental impact, I present zooarchaeological data that I collected from these two sites. Zooarchaeology is the analysis of animal bones and other durable animal remains recovered during excavation of archaeological sites. This analytical technique provides insight into food, trade, and animal husbandry practices. Not surprisingly, the archaeological record diverges sharply from historic portrayals of Chinese people. In particular, zooarchaeological data runs counter to stereotypes of Chinese people eating a diet consisting of rodents and diseased animals. Data from over 15,000 animal bones from the Market Street Chinatown show that residents consume primarily pork and beef, which they heavily supplemented with chicken, duck, and myriad fresh and dried fishes. Bear paw bones like the one pictured here, recovered from the site, demonstrate that community residents had access to a valued feasting item, and this consumption may reflect movement up the social and culinary ladder afforded by migration. The bulk of the 69 cat bones I identified, which are, you can't really read it, but they're in the exciting list of data that you can't read. The bulk of the 69 cat bones I identified, it would be boring even if you could read it. Most of those cat bones were from animals consumed for food, as many of these showed clear signs of butchery from cleavers and were discarded alongside other food waste. Given the denigration of eating cats in American popular discourse, the consumption of cat meat by site residents suggests that this practice was either worth the potential negative attention or potentially done in opposition to Anglo-stereotyping. In the Aspen section camp, a smaller assemblage of 3,900 animal bones show that pork provided the bulk of the meat, and was heavily supplemented with chicken, duck, jackrabbit, and imported and local fish. The pork bones at the Aspen section camp were also more heavily processed and butchered than those in the Market Street Chinatown, suggesting that the site's inhabitants potentially had less meat on a day-to-day basis and were using pork bones more frequently as an ingredient, such as in the production of delicious stocks for soup. Wild-caught porcupines, badgers, and deer made occasional appearances in meals, indicating the importance of hunting and self-sufficiency. A single cow bone and a butchered cat bone reveal that these animals were also eaten at railroad workers' tables. I did identify rat bones at both of these sites, but none of them showed evidence for butchery and consumption. In fact, I'm unaware of any rat or mouse bones exhibiting butchery marks ever being recovered from any archaeological site, any Chinese archaeological site in the American West, a strong indicator that Anglo stereotypes of Chinese immigrants as rat eaters were nothing more than racist slander. Taken together, the data from these two sites reveal a healthy and diverse meat diet. These patterns are paralleled by data collected by paleoethnobotanist Virginia Popper from plant remains such as seeds recovered from both sites. The identified plants include leafy greens, melons and squashes, and fruits such as peaches and strawberries, alongside preserved plants imported from China like lychee and jujube. Together, the animal and plant data reveal a healthy and diverse diet quite unlike that presented in 19th century racist depictions of Chinese foodways. Further, a near absence of pork bones showing evidence of disease or infection at both sites shows that the pork Chinese consumers ate, much of it raised by Chinese pig farmers, was not diseased in any appreciable way. A closer examination of the 5,700 identified fish bones from the Market Street Chinatown yields data relevant to reconstructing the multi-scalar connections within 19th century Chinese communities and the supposed impact of Chinese food industries on the natural resources of the United States. The Market Street Chinatown assemblage contained over 50 different fish taxa, including North American fish such as rockfish, Sacramento perch, Sacramento blackfish, sheephead and flounders, and Asian taxa such as threadfin bream, yellow croaker, pufferfish, and snakehead. I can trace fish from the site to Chinese-run fisheries in the San Francisco Bay Area, Southern California, the San Joaquin and Sacramento River systems, the South China Sea, and freshwater sources in Malaysia or nearby locales. The Aspen section camp tells a similar story, as it also has fish from multiple California fisheries and the South China Sea. The volume of fish within these assemblages is evidence for the extensive catch, production, and trade of salt fish by Chinese fishermen and the impact they undoubtedly had on West Coast fisheries. However, similar statements apply to zoarchaeological evidence of Anglo fishing operations which heavily targeted species such as salmon. Of note for both Chinese assemblages, although I frequently identified small fish remains from taxa such as jack smelt, top smelt, and herring, I not once identified a bone from the immature fry of a commercially important species such as rockfish. This stands in contrast to the veracity of accusations by David Starr Jordan and others who portrayed Chinese fishermen as the scourge of all native food fish on the West Coast. Finally, the identified animal remains also help break down notions of Chinese communities as insular and unchanging. First, historical evidence suggests that 19th century rural Chinese communities rarely ate fresh meat and instead relied primarily on preserved meat or salted or dried fish. This matches preliminary results from recent archaeological fieldwork in Chengdong Village, a Chinese home village in Kaiping County. This work was undertaken by the Chengdong Village Archaeology Project, a collaborative effort between Stanford University archaeologists and Wuyi University's Guangdong Jiaoxing Cultural Research Center in Jiangnan, China. During this work, we did not recover a single animal bone from deposits dating to earlier than 1980, whereas at North American Chinese sites, animal remains are one of the most common things recovered during excavation. Here, absence tells a story. Prior to recent times, not only was meat scarce, but bones themselves were used as a resource to feed dogs and fertilize garden beds, removing them almost completely from the archaeological record. In contrast, the large amount of animal bones found at both the Market Street Chinatown and the Aspen section camp reveal that meat was consumed much more commonly in the United States. This divergence from home village life allowed Chinese communities abroad to create new food traditions in which meat played a central role. However, this cooking was still done in reference to the home village in China, and familiar ingredients such as saltfish and preserved vegetables were eaten alongside fresh meat, poultry, and fish. Fish and other ingredients were sourced from Hong Kong, regional fisheries, and local markets, showing the connections built by Chinese communities to maintain ready access to valued food items. Recent ancient DNA testing performed in a bear paw bone from the Market Street Chinatown also shows a regional trade connection, as the paw was genetically linked to a bear population found only near the southern Canadian border between British Columbia and Alberta. Although Chinese food producers supplied much of these ingredients, Chinese consumers also turned to Anglo merchants as well. In contrast to the many pork bones cut with cleavers by Chinese butchers, the beef bones from the Market Street Chinatown were butchered in an Anglo fashion using saws, indicating that Chinese consumers bought beef from Anglo butchers. The presence of a Dover sole bone also indicates similar connections, as this fish lives in deep water accessible only by the trawl nets used by Anglo fishermen. Additional examples abound, and together they illustrate how Chinese in North America localize their food practices, bringing together diverse sources of ingredients and creating food production industries. In some ways, my paper today has simply reaffirmed something we already know, that racist stereotypes do not represent reality and are instead driven by the political and social goals of those who employ them. However, I would argue that in the case of broad themes such as food, health, and impact of animal populations, zooarchaeological analysis can provide an additional line of data with which to combat historical and modern stereotypes. Further, zooarchaeological data lend themselves to explorations of how 19th century Chinese people made lives amidst a growing anti-Chinese movement. The data from the Market Street Chinatown and the Aspen section camp reveal how Chinese people created new culinary traditions by combining locally available foods such as pork, beef, poultry, and fish, sourced from Chinese and Anglo merchants, regionally produced saltfish and bear paws, and imported saltfish and vegetables from Hong Kong and beyond. In the Aspen section camp, Chinese railroad workers also engaged in hunting and fishing, bringing wild animals into their foodways. The ready supply of meat, whether domestic or wild, to Chinese diners in North America ran counter to the culinary practices in home villages, and it allowed Chinese abroad to climb the culinary ladder and enjoy previously expensive or unattainable foods, such as bear paws. Taken together, the data from these two sites reveal the dynamic and flexible foodways characterized Chinese life in 19th century North America. Migration offered Chinese abroad an opportunity to redefine their culinary practices, and the constant flow of people and ingredients between home and abroad maintained strong connections that shaped this emergent cuisine. Cooking in immigrant communities was heavily influenced by understandings of food from southern China, and the incorporation of ingredients such as saltfish and bear paw reflect this. And despite public negativity, in the United States, Chinese consumers continue to cook and eat foods from home, all while trying new ingredients and even buying them at times from Anglo merchants. Thank you.